Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this brownbag seminar from the organized by the Population Division. Today we have with us Edith Daring, that will be introduced by Patrick shortly. I'm here just to welcome you and to give you to set the housekeeping rules very briefly. So, as I mentioned, the meeting is recorded. Will not be widely shared, but for your information, is recorded. So Edith will will do the presentation, and we will take the questions after she finishes the presentations. While she presents, please mute yourself. During the Q&A, you can ask questions by raising your hands on Teams or raising your hands in person, or also you can use the chat box of the meeting. When taking the floor, please unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and introduce yourself, including name and affiliation. And then for those who are not in our mailing list for the brownbag seminars, if you want to be added, please just type your name, affiliation, and email address in the chat box. So I will add you in the mailing list. So thank you so much. I'll give the floor to Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Julia. So today we have Edith Daring, who is going to give us a presentation about her research, her PhD research on population estimation based on different type of sources of information, especially for countries lacking recent population censuses. Edith has a background in statistics. She has several masters from France and from the UK. And she will give a short overview of her academic trajectory. She has worked as a research fellow with WorldPop for a couple of years, and now she's finishing her PhD at Oxford with the Lever-Hulme Center for Demographic Science, where she has been focusing on emerging strategies for counts when traditional sources are unavailable, including for near real-time humanitarian situations. And Edith, if you like to introduce yourself, and you have the screen. Thanks.
Excellent, sweet. So thanks a lot for, first of all, to have me. I'm really excited. It was really nice to put together this presentation. That's a bit of an overview of what I've been doing so far. So I will give a presentation that should last 40 minutes, and so such that there's plenty of room at the end for questions. So yeah, a bit my background so that you understand where I'm talking from. So as Patrick was saying, I started as a research fellow at WorldPop Research Group. So I'm guessing that some of you might have heard about it. So therefore I can answer question related to research being done there at the University of Southampton. Then I am, since 2024, a population data scientist for the NowPop project, which is less known, and you will hear about it, and which is really about humanitarian context and crisis context, and estimation people in crisis context at the University of Oxford. And then on top of that, of course, I'm doing my PhD at the Lever-Hulme Center for Demographic Science, and it has not yet a very sexy title. It's just called Estimating Population in Data Scarce Contexts. But I will find a sexier title later. So this is a bit, where I'm talking from. And you can see that there is like a common thread throughout all those denomination, which is around estimating some national population stocks by age and sex in places where it is impossible to do a census. And here I actually really like each picture makes sense because that's where I worked. So the first one is the census is not possible because there is insecurity. So surveyors can't be sent on the ground. below it's Colombia. It's like more like census is difficult to undertake because it is in the Amazonian region, so it's very difficult to collect the data there. The two cases below are Ukraine and Gaza. So here we're talking more about forced displacement. So it's difficult to do a census just because, I mean, not just because, but like the events are unfolding very quickly. So it's like impossible to gather a comprehensive information from the ground on population sizes and displacement, let's say. And the last one, I put down like registration data here. And this is more the idea that census can be done, sure, but it's quite cost like resource intensive, sorry. And so the idea is to see if there's no other source of data that can help the census. So just because the census is a costly activity. So this is all the like the all the setting where I worked on estimating population. And I used what can be coined or has been coined the data revolution in demography in particular. So at my time at World Pop, I used mainly satellite imagery. Then for the Now Pop project, I'm mainly using social media data and mobile phone data, a bit of satellite imagery as well, but just to like, the focus is more on those two sources. And for my PhD, I'm using all of them. And on top of it, I have a chapter using administrative records. So I'm going to really cover all those sources during this presentation, such that, you have really like the full overview of the newer source of data that has been used to do some population estimation or population modeling so far. So what is the one concept that I really wanted to hammer through this presentation is the concept of population nowcasting. So I'm guessing that it's quite used, but I just wanted to just reinforce it because this is what I am focusing on. And the concept of nowcasting is coming from weather forecast, and the idea is rather than forecasting in the future, the idea is to nowcast, so predict the number of people today, with the idea that it's really difficult to shorten the gap between something is happening and it is being quantified. So every nowcasting exercise is about shortening this time gap. And we'll see that through this presentation, we're going to talk about nowcasting, but with different time lengths. So we're going to start with satellite imagery as a way to complement the decennial census. So here we're talking about like a decennial census, so every 10 years. So we don't shorten so much the period between something is happening and the the demographic event is happening and then it's being quantified. But we're helping the census with satellite imagery. So that's going to be the first focus of the presentation. The second is going to be more on updating census-derived projection with administrative records. So here we're shortening a bit because rather than having a census every 10 years, we have a census at one point in time, but then we update it with administrative records every year. So here with from 10 years, we are compressing the time to 1 year period. And then I'm going to cover quickly. So I've been told that people on the call might be more interested in like more traditional census type exercises. But in the third chapter or section of the presentation, I'll cover more like crisis response. And so estimating forced displacement. And that's when I'm going to cover more social media and mobile phone data. So that's the program of today. So let's start with satellite imagery to complement censuses. So that was like 5 years or 6 years of my life when I was like at WorldPop, University of Southampton. And there have been two situations where we were using satellite imagery to complement censuses. One was to fill the gaps. And I have been involved in the census, the Malian census and the Burkina Faso census, so 2020, I think for Burkina Faso, and Mali 2022, I think, if I remember correctly. And here the idea is that we're using satellite imagery because there are accessibility issues in some areas. So for Burkina Faso, it's been mainly in the northeast, as you can see on the map. Have been also involved in work where there's been full estimation, which means that we don't have even a census, and we're trying to have the number of people. I put in like italic the one that I've not been involved, Nigeria and Papua New Guinea, but I've been involved in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm not going to cover those because they're very similar technique than for Burkina Faso, and I think Burkina Faso is first of all, there's a paper that is out, so it's easy to find the reference from it, and it's like a very nice study. And I want to emphasize here that we worked closely with the INSD, so the National Stats Office of Burkina Faso. And I'm going to cover obviously more the technical aspect, but I want to stress that there've been a lot also of kind of institutional aspect of this collaboration that was that entailed like capacity strengthening and like loads of workshop before mainly COVID happens, to be fair. So how does it work? The idea for this filling the gaps in the census is that you have all the enumeration areas that has been covered by the census and where you have a number of people that have been counted in those enumeration areas. So you have all those little clusters that are across the entire country, and then there are the areas that can't be covered. So these, I took a screenshot, so it's not that clear, but there's gaps in white on the first map. And then you use geographical covariates to fill the gaps in order to obtain the estimates that are in the area that could not be covered. Yeah, and so there's going to be 2 slides with equation. This is a trigger alert. There's 2 slides with equation. This is the first one. The second one is going to be later. The model itself was pretty simple to some extent, because it's basically it's a Bayesian model, and it's basically saying that we are representing the number of people that is being observed on the ground by a Poisson regression where there's a density of people times the settled area. And settled area is an important one because this is being derived from satellite imagery. So it's a map of settled area. And then the idea is how to estimate the density of people per settled area, and that we use geospatial covariates. So typically, we use distance to road with the idea as a covariate, like in a linear regression that you can see in the third row, where the closer you are to a road, the more likely the density of people per settled area is going to grow. So this is the core model. And we've been using that to estimate where there's been where the census surveyors could not go. I just wanted to cover that because this is something that is being known from WorldPop. It's the second step that we've done in Burkina Faso. It's not at all mandatory, but then once we had all the full coverage and we knew that the total population across the entire country, then we did a second stage of disaggregating the number of people in smaller scale with geographical covariates, and that's called the top-down approach. But this is not the main focus of the presentation, because the presentation is really about estimating when we don't know the number of people, not like disaggregating a full total. So making a difference here for people that are familiar with the WorldPop approach. I just wanted to cover quickly those are new results. That was my first chapter for my PhD, which was like, but does this model actually work? Because before we could only test the model by leave one out or cross validation, by taking out some cluster from the analysis and predicting it back. But I used for my first chapter the census from Colombia, the 2018 census from Colombia, and the DANE, so the National Stats Office, was kind enough to share with me a quality coverage indicator where I could like really focus only on the areas that were considered as being greatly covered by the surveyors. And then, so I had now 15,000, I think, something like that, cluster where I actually knew the number of people and I could try different models and try different sampling strategy and so on and so forth. And basically my take is that it's quite hard actually to estimate the variety of lands, like people are, because it's hard to know. Basically, mainly the problems is that when you are in an area where there's a lot of mixed use building, it's hard to estimate it. When you have an area where there's a lot of like different heights in building, it's hard to be correct. So I would say that to have a model that is only based on satellite imagery derived covariates is really a last resort kind of setting where transfer can happen between the area where you have data and the area where you don't have data, and mainly like the density of people is quite like uniform and doesn't vary too much, and also the building structure, people live in buildings and the building structure are easily detectable from satellite imagery typically, which is not the case in the Amazonia region because of all the forest cover. So yeah, that's the take from my first chapter. So now we're shifting completely. We're not talking satellite imagery anymore. We're talking administrative records to update censuses. And this is really a work in progress. This was supposed to be the very beginning of my thesis, but obviously thesis happens in a weird manner, and it's going to be the last one, and I'm going to work on it starting in 2 weeks. But I've done quite a bit of work to prepare the work. And this is a collaboration with DANE, so the National Stats Office of Colombia. And the idea is that they currently, like a lot of countries, compiling some form of population register by having different administrative records. And so the idea is that there's a lot of people in the administrative records, but it doesn't cover all the population in there. And so can we use this wealth of information that is kind of updated every year to update the 2018 census? That's roughly the situation where there are some. So DANE has can link records through one personal number. And so that's the situation, like 30 million people can be linked, but then there's 13 that can't be linked and 4,000 that are 4 million that are missing. So the match with the census is not that good. So the idea for us at Oxford, or rather the collaboration with DANE, was to see if it's possible to do more modeling rather than just deriving just numbers from just a manual checking of the data records. The idea is that potentially the data records are too far from the census, but we could model the relationship between the administrative records and the census in order to predict with the administrative record what the census would have observed in 2019, 2020, 2021. This slide is to show how each point is a municipality by age and sex and how it differs with the census. And it's from one of the registers. So you can see, like from a first glance, that so if I remember correctly, I've done that in January, so I need to update myself, but it's like basically there is a social benefit register and a health register, so Bedua and Sisben. Those are the two main, the two registers that have the closest count to the census, but it differs a lot by age. Typically, like it's harder to capture the babies and the older people. You can see that depending on where you are, like in Antioquia, it's another register that is better. In Guyana, it's really, that's in Amazonia, it's really hard to capture. So there's really like a variety of quality that varies by age, by sex, and by geographical area. So really the purpose, and we can see here from this slide that it's both mainly underestimating the count of people, but sometimes overestimating the number of people. So there's quite a bit of trouble, and the idea would be to see how can we correct the administrative records. And what data do we have? We have data from the census, or based on the census at departmental level, that is basically projections of mortality, fertility, internal migration, and international migration. And we have data from registers at municipality level. And we have and what is really important in 2018, we have what we can be considered as the true population from the census 2018. So that's the idea, is not to it's going to be the one that has been corrected for omission by the National Stats Office themselves, and that's going to be considered as the true population. Okay, this is the trigger alert. This is the other slide that has some equation in it, and it has not been implemented yet, and there might be issue in it. So please just like a bit of like understanding for that work. But I think that from the demographer or the one working with projection, it could be an interesting model. So I wanted to cover it, and I'm quite excited actually about it. There's going to be a process model it's very similar to the chord component model, and it's going to be a latent one. So the idea is that there's latent variable that are the true number of people, the true fertility rate, the true survival rate, and the true immigration rate, and so on and so forth. And then there's going to be the observation model, where the administrative records are going to be an observation of the number of people, so N. We're going to have the fertility projection, that's going to be an observation of fertility rate. The survival or mortality projection or survival, it's going to be an observation of the latent survival rate. And the idea would be to both model the discrepancy between projection and truth, and the discrepancy between register and true population. And it can be potentially, I think it can be like estimable, because we have the 2018 data that can help with the discrepancy in administrative records between how many people are observing the administrative records and how many people there are in the census. So with all these data flows, I think it is possible to kind of like reunite them in a model to try to update the census projection. So quite excited about that. The last chapter that I wanted to cover is the use of digital traces in forced displacement context. So here the situation is more that it is impossible to do a census given the condition on the ground, and given there are more present issues, and it's not possible to like send an army of surveyors. And so what can we do to estimate how many people moved and where did they go? So I'm going to start with a former project that has not been led by me, and I'm going to give the credits. And because I joined the project later. And this is based on Facebook data or Meta data, because there is some Instagram data, but that has not been leveraged yet. And what is it? It's marketing information. So we pretend that we are a marketing agency, and we want, it is possible to know from the marketing API of Meta platform to know how many users, let's not talk about people, how many users are on the platform at this date in this location. It is possible to have by language and by education, but that we haven't leveraged yet. So this is the data, and that's, I didn't give a trigger alert for this model because it's very simple. It's a deterministic method where basically at T0, it's considered to be like T before the crisis happened, the war, the conflict. We compute what we've been calling a penetration rate, which is the number of users compared to the population, the true population that we get from a census data. And then at T, after the war, we have the population being predicted, that is the users divided by the penetration rate. So just like a ratio of ratio. We have done some adjustment such that the total population still matched the total population, the true total population, and this allowed to account for penetration rates that are declining uniformly through an area, through the entire country, because it tends to, we observed from the raw data that everywhere it plummets because it's harder to have access to internet, to electricity, and so on and so forth. But by doing this trick of adjusting to population total, we can adjust uniformly for a decline in penetration rate. This has been, so this is the paper is out, it's by Leisure and all, and has been first applied in Ukraine. And it's a very cool example of, using social media data, because what the displacement that was estimated before the work of Leisure and all was at 1.6 million, and they soon estimated 5 million people being displaced. And this sounded very like implausible, and how come it's like 5 times what has been estimated by the UN agencies. But then there's been the survey, and now I forgot the name, but there's a common survey that is being done to try to have some more information. And from this survey, they came out also with 5 million. So they were greatly underestimating the number of forced displacement at the beginning of the conflict, and the social media data was in line with the survey that came later. So that was really a good example of the data revolution in demography. And so this is a work that I have been involved with. It's to apply the same method, but for Gaza. And you can see on this slide, so this is the different governorate, and I'm not going to go through all what happened. This is for the 6 first months of the conflict, and we basically can see how the north population plummets. We can see when there's a truce, when the population comes back. We can see how Rafah was the safe haven where everyone safer heaven at the beginning, where everyone congregated and so on. So this was very useful and went directly into the rapid response. But what is also interesting from more of a research perspective, not directly for the rapid response, is that because this data, so the meta or marketing data, is available for all the countries, we could also do some comparison between countries. So here you can see in green Ukraine, in yellow Gaza, and in grays, Egypt and Jordan. And so Egypt and Jordan was being used more as a neighboring countries that where nothing happened, and see how does it compare to the displacement being observed in Ukraine and Gaza. And basically, if you take it in absolute term, Ukraine is has experienced massive displacement, but when you're taking in relative terms, Gaza has seen, and we're talking just the first 6 months, a displacement population. So here it's the displacement, and here's the rate. So from one day to the other, and we see that it's like 3 times higher, 8 times quicker, and 5 times more sustained on average in Gaza than in Ukraine. So you can kind of start to build a picture of different crisis contexts, which was not possible before, because normally there's more ad hoc data collection that can't be really compared through contexts. So yeah, that's the richness of digital trace data. And lastly, this is not completely compelling, but it is possible to disaggregate it by sex. The data is a bit scarce because there's some you hit the privacy threshold, which is at 1000. And if you hit this one, the data, it's 0. So you can't derive any information. But you can see that basically when it's in pink, it's through time. But when it's in pink, it's the woman that move first. Woman, it's a weird denominator, as in, I don't know if it's the gender, if it's the sex, it's what's being classified by Facebook itself. So can't really say what it is. But women move more when it's less risky, which is at the beginning, they all move first. But then when it's becoming more risky and we don't know what's happening, it's more the men that move first. And this is some kind of this is the insights daily, because we had this information daily. So this is something that was not possible before the age of the digital age. This is a monitoring that was kind of not possible before. But let's not be too optimistic about that. We were the way we were accessing the data, which was legal, I'm just saying that, was restricted by Facebook 6 months in the conflict. And they changed their API, probably because they didn't want this kind of work. I don't know, but it was not possible anymore to retrieve this data. And so it was not possible anymore to do this form of exercise. So what is the next step? And this is a work that so that's the NowPop project. So just plug that in. NowPop project at the Leverhulme Center, which is being led by Leisure, that was doing the first work in Ukraine. And so still in Ukraine, it's funded by WHO. And the idea is more of a research project here, where we're trying to see if a model could help bring different data sources together to try to estimate population displacement. And here I didn't put the legend. So we have a covariate here, which is the war fires detected from satellite imagery. Here, a covariate that is the settlement damages, also collected from satellite imagery. Here, this is conflict data that is collected by through reading a lot of media report and a lot of posts and social media posts and so on by a team at ACLED, and they're creating this conflict event database. And I need to really emphasize that we just got access to data from Vodafone, so monthly data here, not anymore daily, we're by age and sex of subscribers. And we got also flows of data. So flows from one Homadas, which is admin 3, to another one. So we're currently trying to see if, because for the first response, it was not, we didn't have the time to develop a model, but now this is the focus. So yeah. So to recap, I have covered here, and this is like a table from my PhD, and this is kind of like covering the different source of data, demographic data that now are existing, and trying to like classify them by different aspects and comparing them. So I covered here during this presentation administrative registers, mobile phone data, social media data, and satellite data. And we can see that not one source can be at the same time frequent, at the same time clearly an individual where there's no need for modeling, at the same time sustainable through time, and inclusive where there's no massive bias in the population being covered, and also big, having like a big sample of the population in it. So it's really, I really, my take from all the 6 years of like working with demographic data is really this this thing of like trying to work in integrating data together, because we are in a situation, I think, where census answers questions but doesn't answer them quickly as we want them. And so, and not everywhere, as we've seen, like there is issues with the census. And I'm not at all saying ditching the census, because this is not at all, like it's a very rich source of information. But we are at a stage where it is possible to switch from a perspective of enumerating and counting one by one everyone to trying to model with different data sources. But, and what I really want to emphasize is, there is not such a source that is complete. It might be maybe in Sweden, if you take the population register, some particular cases might have the perfect database, but I think that the search for the perfect database is kind of not going to happen. And what needs to happen is more work on integrating different data flows. And I want to plug in a last work that have been doing, and that is more on the ethics of data, and that's more me being a bit, utopian. And so I was thinking a bit about all these data sources, and I feel like it's clearly we have switched from a situation where the census is being done for the good of the people and with some form of participation of the people. And when I'm saying people, I'm saying citizen. So really, I'm talking about the relationship between government and citizens. So this was a public good collected with some form of consent. And with all the data sources that have been covering so far, we are entering way more of a commodification of demographic data. And this commodification of the demographic data by public, but also by private companies, but also to some extent the state as well. Commodification, not because they're selling it, but because they're being extracting some form of extraction from the citizen without their clear understanding of what's happening. And the opposite of a census, where it's clear, you know what's happening, you're being counted. When you're giving your data to your GP, or sorry, your general, like your medical doctor, it's not like you don't know that you're being counted at the same time. So there is a bit, we're switching from more inclusive, and here I'm talking inclusive more of on a democratic perspective, and we're switching to more of a commodification, where basically, for example, we bought the data from Vodafone, and it's a bit problematic because they are not, and their aim is not to collect information, demographic information. It's like a second product that they have and that they're selling. So I think it's a bit, and the other aspect that is I find interesting is that because, so I'm saying that modeling is very important now with all the data streams, but modeling requires capacities. And I think that to some extent, currently, there's been a bit of an extraction happening compared to the National Stats Office, because modeling is happening mainly in research institutes and mainly in research institute in the north. So there is, I feel that with like all those data, the data revolution is like amazing, has immense potential, but brings with it kind of also like a lot of like shifts a lot what it is to count people. And I just want to plug my like little utopian idea, because I'm in research, so I can just dream. And so my take is that I think that comparatively, so we all know the GDPR that is protecting individual data. I think that we need something that is also at the aggregate level, because individual data is not so key here. It's really like the wealth is coming from the aggregated data, the collective data. When it's being like summed up together, that's when you're starting to have a picture about what's happening. And my point is that this aggregated data is kind of a common good that should be given back to the society, and everyone would benefit from that, both private and public institutions, because we would all benefit from a better understanding about the number of people that are currently living in some localization or some location. So I am, suggesting a form of public data library where the different like data gatherer could, demographic data gatherer could like just put together the data, and then estimation could be done in a more collaborative way, following some like fair and care principles. So this is, I know it's been a lot, and I know that I've said a lot because I was so excited to really like cover all the work that I've done. So I'm sorry if you're now like completely brain frozen, but just want to thank the team that I am in, because obviously it needs more than one person to do all this work. And I'm not like thanking everyone from the beginning, but just the team I'm currently in. And Douglas, Andrea, and Reedy, and all the Leverhulme Center. And yeah, that's about my presentation.
Thank you. So did you get some messages from the chat with anyone?
Not yet, but we can open the floor to
anyone has some questions. Luba?
Yeah. Can you hear me, Edith?
Yeah, perfectly well.
Okay. I have a couple of questions about the third method. When you measure penetration of users, do they need to click on your advertisement that pops up on Facebook in order for you to, or they just need to passively view it?
No, so the idea is they don't need to click, because it's basically Facebook telling us with this advert you can reach this amount of people. So it's not like retroactive, it's more like prospective, like.
And how does Facebook get this information? Just because they're logged in?
So basically it's each time that you have an action happening on Facebook, you are considered as an active user, and then there's different way, and this is, I didn't cover that, but there's a lot of like documentation gap. But when you have an action on an activity in Facebook, then your IP is probably logged in, so then they can kind of geolocate you. Of course, if there's a VPN, it's going to be a wrong localization, but and then your age and sex is either being, and we're not even sure, but it's either what you put on your profile, or it's what they inferred from your text. So it's a bit of a gray demographic data, I would say.
And how do you, like, when you see a decrease in users, how do they know that they actually moved as opposed to not having access to internet or electricity or mobile phone coverage? Because if you're in a war zone, like, these things often get cut off.
Yeah. So this is so that's what happened when we were looking at the raw data in Ukraine, and basically everywhere there was a decline. So if everywhere there's a decline, this is demographically doesn't make sense, because if there is somewhere a decline, you have somewhere an increase if you're talking about internal migration. So this is when what we actually are picturing is the relative decline. So if it's like a decline that is higher in one location than in another location. And the underlying assumption is that decrease in penetration rate are happening uniformly. So then if it's happening uniformly, then if you have in Kharkiv a higher decline and in Kyiv a lower decline, then you have actually an increase in Kyiv. So that's the deterministic method.
But what if Kyiv just has better electricity and mobile phone coverage? Like, how can you tease that apart?
So we can tease apart if originally the coverage was different. We can't tease apart if the coverage changed during the conflict.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem.
Yes, indeed. And that's the problem with the deterministic method. And what is impressive is that despite those massive assumptions, and I completely agree it's massive assumption, the picture that is being given is kind of like makes sense, and it's like corroborated with other, because we can like not confirm, because I mean with crisis settings, so confirmation is a bit like validation is a bit of a big word, but it's like when you can look at like shelters numbers and these things, so it's like it makes sense. But that's why we want to go, and that's why we got the funding from WHO, is to go beyond just like having to do this very simple assumption. And that's when the covariates are coming in, because the covariates would be on the detection probability. So for example, if you have more conflict, the penetration rate would adjust potentially. Like that's the idea of the modeling. Or we have a data set that has not been so actually interesting so far, but internet disruption. There was like an institution covering that, and it was, well, yeah, that's what we're working on now.
Yeah, some questions online.
Yes, we have two people who raised. You finished?
Yeah.
We have two people online who raised their hands. One is Simone Cecchini, and the other one is Romesh Silva, if I'm correct. Please, Simone.
Hi, sorry, my camera is not turning on. Thanks so much for the great presentation. Thanks for the POP division colleagues for setting this up. I'm Simone Cecchini, Director of CELADE, the Population Division. And well, in our region, countries that are not doing the census are an exception, like Haiti because of the security situation, or Cuba because of financial problems. In general, it's more like Colombia, countries that are doing their census, and maybe they have some areas that are difficult to reach or where there is more omission. My question for you is basically, in light of your experience, what would you recommend to these countries that have different data sources? They have census, they have surveys, they have administrative records, and they want to innovate. So for state-led national statistical systems, in light of your experience, where should they put their money on? And also, by the way, I really like your recap chart, and with the 5 dimensions. And maybe in the future, it would be interesting also to have a 6th dimension on costs and color each source by the cost. Thanks.
Thanks for the review of my PhD. This is included. Yeah, so it was interesting to work with Dane because their internal focus has been more on trying to better do the linkage between sources and doing machine learning to do that and to try to integrate the sources. For me, I feel that because there's only roughly 60% of the population in the REP, so their register, I would rather focus the exercise on debiasing the administrative register and use the administrative register to like update population, but debiasing that. And for debiasing, for me, it's more like some form of modeling with a census, and then you can follow this is another form of penetration rate. Therefore, it all makes sense together. It's like also a penetration rate, but just like coming from different sources. And this is something that I know it's problematic for stats offices, is not easy to do modeling and not to do like deterministic method, because modeling is stochastic. And so then you have this issue that is less like understandable by the public. And so I think that we're going to be really in a tension currently, like so it's interesting with the UK. They're doing their dynamic population model, which is a Bayesian model, like bringing those different state administrative register, because the UK has no linkage possible, because they are they don't collect any like identity form, a form of identity. And so now they're also like trying out a modeling, but I'm really curious to see if it's going to take on, with the political question of stats offices. I hope that it can like roughly answer the question.
Ramesh, do you have your question?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Is the audio, can you hear me?
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Edith, for the really expansive and interesting presentation, and for sharing all of this work. I'm Ramesh Silva. I'm the technical lead at UNFPA headquarters here in New York on population data and estimation in humanitarian settings. So this is very interesting for this kind of work that we do. We are UNFPA, we're the lead agency of the UN system in terms of doing subnational population projections by sex and age, to support humanitarian decision-making in a number of the places which you've already mentioned, and many others. I had a couple of reflections and questions, if it's okay. Thank you for your work in Colombia and for engaging administrative records. That was very interesting. If I heard correctly, you went quite quickly there, but it sounded like the registers which you're using was a social benefit register, and I think it was some kind of health information system. And so my sort of broad question here is, in the work that you've done in Colombia, how do you account for coverage and content errors in these registers at a very sort of primary level? We see in many of these functional registers, like social benefit registers or even health information systems, there are certain inclusion criteria whereby not all residents in these locations are eligible to be included in those registers at a definitional level. And then, after that, at a lower level, even those who are eligible, due to accessibility, financial constraints, bureaucratic problems, and these kinds of things, there's further exclusion, or what we would call undercoverage. And then secondly, in many of the areas that you're working in, where violence or mobility is most extreme, these are often places where the age, particularly age information, is perhaps subject to more uncertainty. Probably less so in Colombia, but perhaps in places, some of the other places that you've been working in, like Burkina, for example, we do see a lot of uncertainty in terms of that age reporting and a lot of age heaping. So I really wanted to understand a little bit more. Are you using these administrative records as is, or is there some additional work to model and account for coverage and content errors? Then secondly, it was very interesting to see some of the digital trace work that you've been doing, which I think some of us have seen other iterations of this work, but again, congratulations. We've done a lot of work. We've done 3 sets of subnational population projections over the last 3 years in Ukraine. And to be honest, we've found the digital trace data to be quite difficult to engage with, to put it lightly. I understand you're using more of a model-based nowcasting framework as opposed to a cohort component projection framework. And my sense is that that provides a lot more flexibility. But just to share with you some of the work that we've been doing, which unfortunately we are unable to share publicly due to martial law constraints by the government of Ukraine. And these are results which can only be shared within the UN country team and with the government of Ukraine. What we found, though, is that the Facebook ads data, I think you're referring to the IOM General Population Survey, if I understood correctly. These data lack information about particularly the subnational location of origin. When we're thinking about mobility, and if we're trying to do some form of population accounting, as you kind of intimated in one part of your presentation, it's kind of important to understand, to have some information about location of origin, in addition to things like age and sex. And so I was wondering whether you could sort of speak to a little bit, not only the selection bias issues of Facebook ads data, but also the content limitations from the perspective of a demographer, where location, age, sex are kind of the building blocks of demographic accounting, particularly when we're doing this work at admin level 1 or admin level 2, or sometimes even admin level 3. Additionally, in addition, you mentioned the work that you're doing now with Vodafone in Ukraine. That's very interesting. Vodafone, of course, is one of 3 mobile phone operators in Ukraine. And if my memory could be deceiving me, but my basic recollection was that the 3 operators are almost split evenly, like 30% each or something like that. So I'm just wondering how you're thinking about using the Vodafone data, given that it represents a very partial accounting of mobile phone usage in Ukraine, and there are certain selection biases in terms of which operator people use in different places. And then forgive me for adding one more piece in, but similar to Simone, very, very interesting, your recap slide with the sort of heat map there. My question there was, is that a subjective assessment that you're providing here in terms of these different parameters of, usability and how up-to-date things are and the coverage? Or is it data-driven based on the 3 case studies in Burkina, Ukraine, and Colombia? But again, big congratulations on all the work and look forward to learning more. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot for having a question about all the presentation. So first, the coverage and administrative register. So yes, so it's interesting to see the difference of approach between DANE and us because they are trying to compile the most comprehensive version. And my take is that it's more interesting to keep all the registers. So we have 11 registers separate. They all give a different picture, and exactly because of what you said, they give a different picture because of selection bias. And so the idea of the model, and because it's a work in progress, I can't tell you if it's going to work, but the idea is that I'm going to keep all the 11 pictures separate, and then I'm going to compare. So I'm using my, you can see my hand. So I'm going to use, so in 2018, I'm going to have all the 11 administrative register, and I'm going to have the true population count, which is the census corrected for emissions. So the idea would be then to compute with covariates or without covariates, what is the selection bias for each of the registers. And then going forward, I have as a latent correct component projection, latent variable, not using data there, and then observing what this is then is telling us about how the population count evolved, what this register, like we have the military register, for example, what they told us about how it evolved in this country and so on, in this subnational unit. So the idea is that it's going to be more probably the relative change that's going to be, I hope, being picked up by the model, and the selection bias being addressed in 2018 by comparing with the true census. And why I'm saying that we can add covariates here is that, for example, we could, if it's needed, I will need to check, is that we could, for example, say that the selection bias is linked to the number of school. If you are in the, we have the register now, like from the school. So we could say the discrepancy, the penetration rate, the selection bias, this is all for the same name, between the true number of people aged 5 to 10 in this subnational unit compared to the register is based on the number of schools. And then we estimate that, and then we could, if we have like every year the number of school, we could just like have a selection bias that is not only estimated in 2018, but that can evolve through time. So kind of switching space to time kind of framework of modeling. This is really work in progress. Then there was a question on content from the work in Ukraine, and like the fact that there is really like a lack of information. And I fully agree that when we want to do projections using the code component method, that we want to have migration, some form of estimating migration, so origin and destination, we want to have kind of a good picture of age and sex. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's really not perfect, or not really good, to be honest. And but it has been quite good for like rapid response. And we'll see. One of the idea was to, because with the deterministic method, we can use just one data source. The idea with the model that we're currently developing is, can we use two data sources as, like, for example, Facebook and Instagram? I know they have like they have bias, both of them, but they have potentially different biases in them. So the idea is to increase the number of proxies, but still here we are really in the situation where we need rapid data streams. So there's a bit this, and it's going to be clunky, this like coming from like day 1, day 2, day 3 estimation to month 1, month 2, year 1, year 2, different data, or maybe interesting, different models. So this is really interesting. Like there's going to be a change, and I'm really looking forward to see what's going to happen in this like coming from one to the other. And you mentioned the origin, and this is like, so I was thinking about directly the mobile phone data that you mentioned later. So then I'm going to answer the third question. So yeah, sorry. Okay. Vodafone is actually the Kyivstar is way better. Sorry, not better. In terms of coverage, has a bigger size of the population in it. And there was the European embargo, or the embargo on Kyivstar, so we could not get this data. Once we secured the funding that was first USAID, we could not anymore. Then there was the data embargo because Kyivstar has some Russian interest. So it was quite a long process to get this data. And so here it's exciting, and it's very exciting because like we have flows, like we have origin and destination. But then the idea is, exactly to account for selection bias. And here I think we will be able to account for selection bias, mainly the underlying one that was there before the war. But selection bias that like changed throughout the war are less likely to be able to capture that, but maybe with co-bias, but yeah. And then I wrote down recap slide, but I'm not sure what I need to say about the recap slide, so I forgot the last question.
Sorry if I might. It was just whether there's a subjective assessments.
It's completely subjective, but I think it's important to have it like kind of clear because it's becoming like a bit of a brain like strain to have all this data, and I was thinking that it was good to like put them together and compare them, and yeah.
Thank you for all the questions and answers. And a last question or a last comment from your side? Thank you for all your time. Yes. Do you have any additional last word you want to have? Oh, Frank, I see Frank has a question, or I see your hand. Do you have a short question, Frank?
I think he said goodbye.
Oh, he said goodbye. Okay, then no question. You have the last word. You have the last word, Edith.
Yeah, so the last tiny word is just that I see Mark Weldon on the call, and I just want to thank because all the code component code, like the LaTeX code or like the way to write it, I took it from your paper. So, so I'm very excited.
Yes, I recognize that slide. Actually, it is. It'd be interesting to. So as you progress on that part, it'd be if you want to chat, do let me know. If you're planning on implementing this co-op component projection in Stan or some other JAGs or something like that. I mean, let me know if you have problems. It can be quite tricky to get it to work in some sort of reasonable amount of time, given how many parameters there are, and that it's kind of an iterative process. So I'm not sure how far. Maybe you've solved it already, but.
No, I just wrote the code, so I'm very happy to hear that I can get some support.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just plan on allocating a little bit of time because it can be quite tricky. So. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that goes actually, because it is very similar to some of the stuff I did a while back. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you need to.
Related to this specific technical challenge, do you know Jeff Heaton in the Imperial College? No. Jeff is involved with UNAIDS in implementing this type of models as well in the context of UNAIDS, and for some of these computational challenges, it may be helpful to get you in touch with him as well.
Excellent. Cool. Thanks a lot.
So, any last word from you?
No, okay. Thanks a lot. I was really, really happy to share all of that and to, take the time to bring them together. I love the fact that it's just one continuum, and the problem is like different institutions tackle different sides, but it's really great to see it as a just estimating people by age and sex. This is the base. Yeah.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your PhD.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Are you nervous?
Yes. Come on.